Hello and welcome back to the Way podcast. I'm Izzy and I am joined with
Mateus
and Jesse.
And today we are finishing up our series on life lessons, looking at some parables. Anything else? Some parables?
Which parable?
Today, spoilers.
Okay, sorry.
Fine. Today we are doing the parable of the talents. But before we get into that, we are going to jump onto the streets, see what people have to say, and then we'll come back.
What do you live for? It's on the back of my t-shirt.
I would say food. I'll probably, if I was with my friends, that'll be my first answer.
The answer's cliche, but Jesus.
Enjoyment, Christ, and money.
In that order?
No. I think we know which order it is, but Christ first, enjoyment, and then money.
I live for God, and yeah, that's about it. To be fair, that's all you really need.
I want to say that I live for Jesus, but I think sometimes I forget to put him first. Sometimes I live for other things, but I do really try to live for him.
I'm not sure what I live for yet. I haven't discovered something that I completely enjoy with all my life.
I think love. I think the end goal is obviously to just be like God and just be focused, but I think for now it's just love and being around people who love me and who I love and that bring me closer to him.
I live for Jesus. Freely is given to you, so freely give to others. So for me that just looks like whatever I've received, when people pray for me and I feel the love of God, I feel like I just want to give it to other people.
I live for the one, man. I live for God. Everything I do. It's tough sometimes and I stumble and I don't do it perfectly, but it's not about perfect, it's about giving everything.
We're back in the studio.
Here we are.
Boys, how do you define success?
Money.
Oh, really?
Yeah?
No.
Expand.
No, I think it's an abstract question because I think a lot of the time the answer is changing in my life. At different points in my life, that answer is changing. I think the Christian answer is very clear, what it should be. I think my head knows that, but my heart doesn't always know that. Success is found, I think, in the Bible, you find success in the obedience and the availability that you give to God. And that's when you are successful. It doesn't actually come from the outcomes.
Spoilers.
But rather from the obedience.
Yeah.
But I don't think my heart always knows that. My head probably does know that a lot of the time, but my heart doesn't always feel it.
Jessica?
Matty, bring the fire.
Yeah.
I relate deeply. I feel like on a weekly basis, my kind of attitude or mindset towards even my priorities in time, because how you view success changes how you view time, and how your thoughts look is changed by how you view success. Yeah, and sometimes my priorities can be my work because I'm just spending the most time on it, and suddenly my mindset of success comes a bit more warped with finance or employees or relationships there. That's another one. In family, if I'm very focused on my family and that's my priority, my view of success is how my relationships are going, how this is going. If my priority is community, it's how my friendships are going. If my priority is God, it's how much I'm stopping everything to be with him. And I think there's always ebbs and flows, but it's kind of learning some sort of balance.
Yeah.
And that's just a weird, long process. Yeah. What do you think is?
I think we shouldn't be afraid of success. I think as Christians, we can get in our head about it, but actually God's with us in our wins. He's also with us in our failures, but our identity should be in him. I think that's the thing. And if that success is in doing really well in your job, we want to do what we do really well, and God actually celebrates with us in that. And with friendships, you want friendships that are really healthy and really great, and God's with us in that. But again, I think we shouldn't be afraid of success.
Yeah.
But
that's great.
It's where our identity lays. But shall we read more of what Jesus has to say?
I like that guy.
Yeah, he's all right. I'm not going to read it because my contact lenses are really bad and I never read it. So one of you can.
Who wants to take
charge?
it? Shall I take? I mean, I've got ESV.
Okay.
Which is the
Mateus,
best
then?
translation. So I guess
No, ESV is the best translation, objectively. I'm joking.
Really?
No.
Well, it's down to.
It's a good translation.
They're all translations are good
guys,
translations.
we have this conversation on every
Probably most
podcast every week.
I'm an NIV gal.
Go on, read it, Jesse.
Shall I take it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to be reading from Matthew 25, verse 14, which is the parable of the talents. It says this, "For it will be like a man going on a journey who calls his servants and entrusts them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away, and he who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, 'Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more.' And his master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, 'Master, you delivered me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more.' And his master said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master.' And he also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, 'Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours.' But his master answered him, 'You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scatter no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." That was a hefty chunk.
Well done for reading it.
Scripture.
So to give a brief synopsis, summary version for me to understand, basically a master goes away and gives 3 servants some talents, which we'll go into and explain in a minute. And the servants do stuff with these talents and the master responds in certain ways according to what they've done. And we're going to break that down and look at it now and what that means and what that's actually saying about us and God and all that good stuff.
All that good stuff.
All that good stuff.
We had a little look before about what the value of a talent was as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite debated and the range is quite wide, but apparently it's roughly in between £1,000 and £30,000.
Quite a range, really.
Some people say it was 20 years worth of wages. Some people say it was £1,000. But it could be a lot, it could be a little, but it is.
Oh, I think it's definitely a lot.
Substantial.
It feels
It's definitely a substantial amount.
Yeah.
And also, well, my Bible doesn't call it a talent; it calls it a bag of gold.
A bag of gold.
Which basically it's a weight of something,
Wow.
a weight of a good amount of stuff in it.
Yeah.
Just put it nicely. But I think that's also he gave them all a good amount of something.
In terms of like first thoughts,
Yeah.
my kind of first thought after reading it, I'm just going to jump straight in,
No, please do.
is the fact that the master actually like gives talents in the first place is just instantly feels like almost like a lesson of God's heart a little bit. Because I don't know, God, you often read, God graciously gives all things. God gives talent to those. He each according to their faith will give talents to people. And it's easy to kind of see God as someone who is quite I don't know, tight-knuckled, where he keeps everything to himself and he just does everything as he wants. But the truth is he actually delegates and he gives.
Very generous.
And he's really generous. The master doesn't have to entrust his servants with talents, but it's because he trusts them that he first gives. And so that's, for me, an instant lesson of God is God isn't a prudent God. He's one who gives graciously,
And trusts as well.
Yeah.
Like you see it in the man of like the owner, the property owner, right? That he trusted his servants with his wealth as he went. He didn't know what his servants would do with his wealth. He didn't know whether they'd go out and spend it like the prodigal son, for example, or whether they'd steward it well. But he trusted them. And so does he trust us with gifts.
I don't think God or the master gives these talents just in order for them to fail as well. I think he gives these talents so that he may be glorified and get a reward back. And so like even that as a lesson for God's heart. Obviously we do see a failure, which is the one, but you also see others thriving. And so when God gives us stuff, he's not opening doors or giving talents or stuff just so we can fail. I don't think God's heart is for us to try things and fail. God doesn't want us to just like hit rock bottom so we can learn from it specifically.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know, that feels like a little bit more of God's heart. It's like actually the reason he's giving gifts isn't just so that we can outrun and burn out and fail, but the reason he gives gifts is so that we can give back to him and glorify him with what we have and what he has given us.
Can I ask what, I mean, I've not received a bag of gold anytime soon. What would be like the equivalent of a talent in our life, like right now? What are some of the things that you guys have received from God?
She's our favourite talent.
Guys, it's my birthday. Stop being so nice.
We're never usually like this.
Well, I think what's interesting in this parable is that, it's talking about talents and money, but we can very much apply it to our abilities or what God has equipped us with. So what is around us, or what is, like who are we? What talents do we have? Abilities do we have? But also what's around us. And I think that's interesting. Even you talking about like, it looks like the master trusts the servants. I don't know what I think about that, because I'm like, does God trust us, or does he just like equip us and hope that we're going to like obey him? And because actually I think we've proven ourselves through the whole Bible that we can't really be trusted, but God can be trusted. Do you know what I mean? But he continues to equip us and give us stuff around us to be used for our good, but his good and his glory, and to build his kingdom. And that's what this is talking about, is like the kingdom of heaven, what that will look like. So anyway, side note, what are my talents? I think, it's looking at what we have in front of us. And I think I was thinking about this last night and thinking about this and thinking about my personal gifts and skills and how I use them for God. So I've got a degree in graphic design, and I definitely use that for God and for his people, but also even my friendships, even looking at the way, like we are just a group of friends, and how we're using these friendships that are around us to, we want to bring glory to God and like talk about him and bring people to God and all of that stuff. And there were the two that came to my mind really quickly, but I'm sure there's more than that. There's music, there's so much stuff that God has given us, me, whatever, that could be used for him. It's very interesting. I think it's a good thing to think about, because I think if we don't think about it, then we can miss almost opportunities that we could be using for him.
I think one of my favorite things about our relationship with God is that he makes us, he calls us to be co-creators with him. And it's the idea that he's an all-powerful God that is creating the entire universe. And here he gives us these things because he wants us to be a part of his story.
Yeah.
And he wants us to
Beautiful.
to work with him. And so he gives us maybe the talent of music, or the talent of time, or the talent of wealth, or the talent of whatever it might be, because he wants us to be a part of his story. But he doesn't need to. He could do it all by himself, but he doesn't want to. He's like, he wants to invite us into the story because he wants to be in relationship with us. He wants to be a part of our lives as much as we are part of him. And so that is, I don't know where I was going to land on that point, but I just love thinking
brilliant.
about that in that way.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And another, you touched on it. It can be like talent in terms of like skill, like music skill, graphic design skill. It can be talent in terms of wealth, like you might, or time. Like I thought those points were brilliant. And you can also see talents as like prophetic gifts from God, and like spiritual gifts from God. When you read through in Matthew 25, it says when he gives his gives the talents to his servants. It says, gives them to one another, to each according to his ability, which is like a phrase that you read sometimes in the Bible. And another place that I instantly remember reading that is in Romans 12, where I'll just read it because it speaks for itself.
Sure.
It's only a few verses, but Romans 12, verse 3. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not at all have the same function. And I think it's so encouraging to know that, you know, we aren't born the same, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't have a plan for our life. Whether you're born with £1 million or minus £1 million, God still wants to qualify you and use you in maybe a different context. If you're born with £1 million, maybe God tells you to give it all away. If you're born with minus £1 million, but then God asks you to give some time to people and you get to spend, it's all very different, and all our contexts are different. And just because you're born somewhere as well doesn't mean you're stuck there. Like, God actually does have a heart to grow you and to bring you into fruition of who he's designed you to be, which is a son of God, which is an heir of an inheritance of heavenly things, which means just like he wants the best for you. He's got gifts for you. He's got so much to give you. And the rest of the passage is about those gifts. And it says, if you have prophecy, use them in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. In the one who teaches, in his teaching. The one who exhorts, in his exhortation. The one who contributes in generosity. The one who leads with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. There's so many different ways that God wants to use us. And so, like, I think one of the reasons why Jesus tells us this story is also to be encouraged that whether we're given 2 or 1 or 5, we're still qualified, and God still wants to use what we have to give back to him. And we'll look at a little bit later about like the reward of what some of those guys get, and we'll see they're actually quite similar, even though it's different measurement wise. They're congratulated the same. Sorry, there's some thoughts.
No, I think it's also like looking at the 5, 2, and the 1, and according to their ability, it almost feels. It can feel a bit like, oh, that doesn't feel fair. Like when I was reading it, I was like, oh, what if I wanted 5 and only given 1? But I think it's because, I was thinking about that. And actually, all of them received a lot, actually. Like we were talking about, a talent is a lot. So they actually all received a substantial amount. Yes. And also then that comparison is such a killer. Like, what's that phrase everyone uses? Comparison is the...
Killer of joy.
Yeah, thief of joy, killer of joy.
Thief of joy. Not in the Bible, though. I did think it was.
Not in the Bible. No,
really?
It's not.
I thought at one point it might be in the Bible.
I don't think
it sounds biblical.
Sounds like it should,
but it's not.
Because
should we write our own Bible?
The Jesse version, the Way version.
The Way version. Oh, no.
we really should
start.
Absolutely not. But anyway, talking about actually, the reason we compare a lot of it is because of pride or envy, and actually. We should be looking at what God has given us as a blessing and know that it's so much. And if we compare it to other people, then we get so fixated that, they have 5 talents and I only have 1. But actually the fact that the master has given a servant anything to begin with, we should be like, wow, what am I going to do with this? Not why do they have more? Why do they have less? Something to throw in there.
So,
should we start looking at them?
Yeah. What can we learn from the 5? From the 2, it says, he who received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. Just before we jump into the 1 and we go into those 2, they obviously like multiplied what they did. Later on, they're congratulated as good and faithful servants for what they've done. What do you think this can look like practically for us?
I think even reading this, it's obvious they were really proactive and they took action, and they took action as if the master was to come back immediately and ask what they've done with their lives. And that's what it's kind of talking about is, Jesus coming back and all that stuff. And so it's interesting is actually the master's given them stuff and immediately they did something with it to advance the master's stuff. To use good vocabulary there. But I think that proactiveness is really interesting.
And they're good stewards, weren't they?
Yeah.
They were responsible with what they had. And they didn't hold it close to their chests, but they were very open with what it would be able to produce. And I wonder, like, with the things that we've been given, may it be our time, are we good stewards? Are we being good stewards of our time? Are we being proactive in our time, with our time, or whether it's our relationships, good stewards of our relationships, proactive in our relationships, and actively being like open-handed with it, being like, this is what I have. Like, these are my fish and bread, Lord. Would you do with it what you
great.
what you will?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great little story you just touched on briefly, but the story of the young boy bringing food to Jesus because they need to feed 5,000 people. And Jesus didn't ask for a food truck, a taco van to feed everyone. He didn't need that, but what he needed was the obedience to bring what you have. And what was brought was these fish and loaves. And what Jesus then did was rewarded it with multiplication. And I think that's like so key within this all is I don't think Jesus really minds about the measurement of things, but what he really cares about is the heart and the obedience that we bring.
Well, you see that even in how he praises them, saying, well done, my good and faithful servant. It's about their character. It's about their heart. It's not about what actually they did. It's about, their heart. And I remember that phrase actually talking to my dad like years ago, where I was like, why do we actually follow God's ways? Like, why? Like, what is actually my reward? Because it was a time where I was like, I just felt like everything was falling apart, and I was like, I'm still like following His ways, but everything just seems really difficult. Like, what is the point of all this? And actually, it was like, actually, if you get to heaven and God says, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," like, oh, that's all we need. And actually, that is what it's all about. Like, it's not about what we do or what we earthly succeed in, but actually it is that character and seeing that as a good thing.
I like the one line of like, God didn't say, well done, good and fruitful servant.
Yeah.
He said, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah.
So it's not about the fruit of our actions, it's about the faithfulness. It's about our faithfulness. It's very much a one line, but it speaks a lot.
It's great.
And even like another comparison to that is when we look at Jesus, when he got baptized, he'd come out of the water and God the Father from heaven came down, or he came down and said, well done, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was that he hadn't done anything at that point.
Yeah.
But what he did do was he was faithful, he was obedient, and he was available.
Yeah.
And I think it points towards this story as well. These gentlemen or women maybe as well that were given these talents. It's not about the countable multiplication of their money. It was about the availability that they gave to what the master had given them.
It's bro.
I think just very quickly, actually again looking at God's character, where God blesses them and then blesses them more. Like, he gives them stuff and then they do stuff and he blesses them more. Like, it's just God's generosity and his kindness towards us, which I think we, again, shouldn't ever take for granted and always see that. That's my last final point.
Yeah, I mean, it can get warped, in it, the word faithfulness and success. It's like those two things. But they're distinct, different things, being faithful and being successful. And I think we can go through times in our life where we can be successful but not faithful to what God's really calling. And we can be faithful but actually not successful because God's calling more. And it's learning that balance constantly of what it is to live in the both and, it feels like we've touched on the 5 and the 2. God gives more. He rewards those who steward well. He cares about our obedience with what we're given. We're not meant to compare, with what we're given, because God's the one who gives. But let's come to the one.
Dun dun dun.
The one. It says in verse 18, But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug it in the ground and hid his master's money. So let's start there.
I always found this probably the most confusing part of
me
this parable, because at first glance it seems like this servant is being responsible with the money, right? He's holding it and trying to be responsible, and so he digs it up so that he might not lose it or that it won't be stolen, and then brings it back to his master. But clearly there's a different message that Jesus wants to point out here.
Yeah.
But what is it?
I mean, I think I can relate to this guy sometimes. Like 1 talent, as we've discussed, is a lot. It could have been quite overwhelming, and particularly in a time nowadays where we're so focused on the end goal and everything looking perfect on social media, and there's not as much conversation around what it looks like to fail, or maybe he was just paralyzed in the fear of failure, which sounds quite familiar. And it actually reminds me a little bit, just like a little personal story around this parable. A few months ago, I was struggling to find motivation creatively. We were filming a lot, and writing a lot, but I felt like I had no capacity for new ideas or exciting joy in ideas. It almost felt like a good phrase for it's like writer's block. And my church that I go to, they called it out. Someone got up and was like, just feel like we need to pray into writer's block. If you feel like you got this, stand up. And I was like, I guess this is me. Stood up, got some prayer. It was wonderful. And I kind of just like began this process of finding joy and creativity again and breaking out of that. And the next day I was walking down my road in where I live. I'm not going to say where I live, but walking down my road.
Exact address.
And with my friend. And we were talking about this moment the night before with writer's block. And as we were speaking about it, this guy screams out from across the road, Jesus loves you. And we were like, oh, yeah, Jesus does love us. Come on, let's go. Anyway, we walk on. He then comes running back up the road and he's like, excuse me, I felt the Lord gave me a word for you. And I was like, oh, okay, what's the word? And he said, do you know the parable of the talents? And I was like, yeah, I know the parable of the talents a little bit, like remind me. And he said, he gave talents to people to multiply. And God wanted like people, these guys to steward these talents that God had given. And I think God has given you talents and he's given you giftings and he's given you a lot of them, which is obviously true.
Humility as well.
Jokes. But he was like, he's given you a lot of dreams, a lot of talents, but you've not been you've not been stewarding. And I think God's calling you to multiply. I think God's calling you to really use these talents for his glory. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like I literally was talking about how I'm struggling to use this yesterday and he prayed for me. And since then I've had loads of creative ideas and it's been really fun. But I look back to the couple weeks before that when I was stuck and still carrying some of these talents and these ideas and these dreams, but I did feel paralyzed by it. And it was, I'd say, mostly the fear of failure, the fear to step out and get it wrong, the fear to, step out and get it wrong. Like it's super real. Like if you've got giftings, if you've got abilities, if you've got money, sometimes it feels a lot safer to do nothing. And that's what we watch happen in this, with this guy. He does nothing. He hides it away and it doesn't go too well. He's described as wicked and slothful later. And it wasn't actually the right call. Even though he might have even thought that it was the best idea or a test or something, it wasn't the right call. And so that's a little personal element that I relate to the story.
Well, and I think we see a lot of that, like that fear thing is probably in here a lot, where actually his fear of failure, whatever that may look like, was greater than his fear of his master or the understanding of his master. And he knew this talent originally belonged to his master and was gifted from him, yet still chose to displease him, not make him happy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting. And even when he like comes back to the master, he gives so many excuses. He blames everyone but himself of his actions, which means he also immediately goes. It shows that he knows something's not right because he immediately goes to blame his master for his actions. And I think that's really interesting. But I think for me, the main thing that I take from, that we can learn from this dude is actually, let's fly on my head, is actually sometimes it's like doing nothing is a greater sin than doing something and like failing it. And that's kind of like weird to get our head around. And there's, what's it called? Like, I've got it written here. Is the sin of omission, so what we don't do, may ultimately be more dangerous than sins of commission of what we do. But like actually us not doing stuff can still cause that sin, that separation from God. And I think that's what we see here, that slothfulness or laziness, as my Bible says, and is a word we use more often, is actually it's that laziness of not doing stuff of what God has given us actually separates us from him, which is actually a bit like, whoa,
scary.
That's a bit scary.
And it might even be like he'd been given the one talent, but he saw his counterparts being given more talents, right? And you think, oh, they have all these talents. Maybe they can do something with their stuff.
I felt disqualified.
Yeah.
But I've only got the one, so I can't really do anything. And I wonder, like, I even relate to that personally when I'm doing something and I'm thinking, oh, I've not got the abilities to do this, or I've not got the resources to carry this out. But my counterparts, they're all really gifted, and they will have the abilities and the resources. So I'll leave it for them to step out, and I'll just sit here on the side. And he didn't have this understanding of his master's wealth, that is like understanding of like abundance.
Yeah.
But rather he felt like he was lacking. And I know I relate sometimes to like God has given me something, and it might seem like a little thing.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, it's only a little thing. I'll just keep it. I'll leave it be for a little bit.
Yeah.
But actually what we see as a little bit, the Lord sees as great.
Yeah.
And there is even the bit at the end when the master, and Jesus repeats this in other parts of the Gospels, but he says, those who can be trusted with the little can be trusted with the much, right? He had been given the little, and because of that might have discounted it. But because he wasn't able to work with the little, then it was hard for him to be trusted with the much. Yeah. And the question is, okay, then what little in our lives do we have that we can take hold of? Again, back to the fish. What's our fish and bread?
Yeah.
What are our talents that we're discounting because we don't believe to be big enough for the Lord to use?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you touched on it briefly, but it's like a mindset thing of, are you viewing your circumstance in a place of like not enough? Like, oh, I don't have enough. I don't have like the others in order to, like, I don't have as much as the 5. So maybe I just shouldn't do anything. Or are you viewing life in a place of like abundance? God has given me everything I need. God has given to me accordingly to my like abilities or even just like my circumstance. And so I'm going to act out of that place, and out of this mindset of like, I have all I need to glorify God. I'm going to use what I have to glorify God. That's a way better mindset than, I don't have as much as, I need to make sure I've got as much as that before I can, I've got to do. Because if you do that, you'll do that forever. You'll never have enough. Billionaires sometimes feel like they don't have enough.
Yeah.
Why? Because they compare themselves to another guy who has an extra billion than them. And it's like, it's a mindset thing. And I think it's so like interesting as well that, because we've talked a lot about this reward, like of, we're faithful and then God rewards us. But what he really does, as you said as well, is he gives more. And what he does is he gives more responsibility. To when I trust you with a little, I trust you with much. And he does, like, he can give more financially, but also when he gives more financially, he gives more, comes with more responsibility to steward that well. And when you look to the other passage in Luke 16, which says, those who are faithful with a little, faithful with much, and those who are dishonest with a little become dishonest with much. is talking specifically into the subject of money. And so like money is an example, but it can be anything. But if we're faithful with much, then we'll be given more. But if we're dishonest with much, actually we become dishonest with more. And so we often talk about the first bit, if we're faithful, then we're given. But actually, if you choose to be dishonest, it becomes a habit. And if you choose to cut corners or hold back your hand in generosity or lie, it becomes easier to do so. And so I think every day you have to make a choice of, am I choosing to step one direction in like the faithful side, or am I choosing to step one direction in the dishonest side? Every decision you can choose to be faithful or dishonest. You can choose to be like Christ-like in every decision. And the more you choose to be Christ-like, the easier it becomes. The more you choose not to be, the easier that becomes.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting looking at like the reward is more responsibility, because that can almost feel a bit weird. I think as humans, we want more responsibility. But again, like that in itself is such a privilege. Like the creator of the earth is giving us more responsibility to make his plan come to action. Like that is crazy. Like that is actually crazy. And I think we, again, shouldn't lose sight of that. And I think a lot of this parable actually reflects for us, like what is our relationship with the master? What is our relationship with God? Because when we know we are loved and we know that he gives so much, and we know that we do not need to have fear, or like we do not need to be a slave to fear, but we're actually a slave to God. That sounds, slave in a positive way. Woo. But like we don't need to be afraid. Then when that's our mindset and we want to build his kingdom, then that's the greatest thing possible.
There's a passage that Jesus says, and he says, those who lives for some, I'm rephrasing, but those who live for something beyond themselves will find true life.
Yeah.
And I think it applies to the third servant, because he was looking for his own self-preservation, and he was only living for himself. And in comparison to the other servants, they were living for the multiplication and the gratification of their master.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to highlight in this, though, and we've touched on it at different points, but I just want to highlight it for literally anyone that's listening. We talk about money in this, but it's not about the money. It's not actually about how much money we have. And I think in the church and in ministry, money can be a touchy subject. But in no way, shape or form does it mean that if you're being good with your responsibilities and stewarding it well, then the Lord will give you lots of money, or vice versa, that you'll take away your money if you're not doing well. It's a lot about the responsibility that he gives us, our availability to his will.
It's good.
Because life is mysterious sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that as well. Yeah.
No, it's great, Matt. Oh, we're almost at the end, but there's one little snippet that we haven't said yet, but we actually get like a bit of an insight into the guy who had the 1 talent's mind, at why he didn't go out and create more money, but why he just buried it in the ground. And we have the answer to his mindset, and it'd be cool to kind of unpack what that might mean. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours." And then his master answered, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." Interesting point that I learned earlier this week that I hadn't ever picked up on when reading this parable. But this is like quite offensive from the servant to say to the master, "I knew he was a hard man." Like, that's a bit hard to hear. There's people that I struggle with in church. And like if I say, I just struggle with sometimes how you speak or something, that's a hard thing in itself, like to hear. But then he says, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. Basically, like, claiming that he's a bit of a thief. He's a bit of a robber, which is like quite, I mean, I'd definitely take that as an insult, like saying, oh, you reap where you don't sow, you just take things, you go where, like that's not very nice to hear at all. And which is interesting, the mindset that this guy's got of this guy as well is that he's a taker, when actually all that's happened so far is that he's given already. And so you even ask like, oh, what's this guy like almost projecting onto the master? Because that's not true. What we've read of the master is that he's giving.
Yeah.
But then this part blew my mind a little bit. But the master responds back, if you knew that I reap where I had not sown and gather where I scattered no seed, then surely you would have invested my money with the bankers. Which is interesting because in this time under Jewish law, it wasn't allowed for a nobleman to put money in the bank and receive interest on it. And so there's actually inconsistency with what this servant's saying. He's made an excuse, but it doesn't actually make sense. If he's going, you're a hard man, you're a stealer, and you're a liar and you're a robber, but then you're like, oh, so he doesn't care about the law, so I'll just put it in and get some interest anyway and make something. He's not sticking to either. He's sticking to him being like a good and faithful man, so he's not going to put it and get interest on it because he's a good and faithful man. He'd never break the law. But also he views him as a robber and a thief and a liar, which is like someone who would break the law. So there's kind of no consistency in how this guy with the one thinks. And it kind of shows that a lot of his process in trying to use his talent is all internal, and how he's thought and his views on his master as a hard man. It's probably his own projection, his own perception viewing him as a hard man rather than who he actually is. Because there's just no consistency.
Well, I felt like I just learned quite a lot there. Thanks, Jesse.
I feel like I just waffled quite a lot.
No, I was learning away. What are some like practicals do you think we can take from this parable into our actual day-to-day lives?
I think the big one, like the overarching sentiment to the parable, is really the view of the servants to the master.
Yeah.
It's the way that they viewed them. Whether they viewed them as gracious, generous, and taking what they've been given, stewarding it, and multiplying it, or whether the point that you had, Jesse, whether they viewed the master as not generous, and in the same way what they'd been given as not abundant and not enough, and so they dug it in the floor. And I think the way that practically it applies to our lives is: do we see God as an abundant, generous Father, and equally what we have been given as enough for him to use? Or do we see him as not that, and what we've been given as not enough? And are we inclined to dig it in the floor and pass it on to the next person, the responsibility? Where is our view of success? Is it in the self-preservation of the one servant, or is it in the willingness to be available and obedient like the other two servants?
Yeah, what he said. Fantastic.
Matty, that was bro.
Let's end there. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for engaging with The Way. Fabulous. If you haven't watched the other life lesson podcasts that we've done, then do check them out. We've gone through some other parables, and we'll be starting a new series next time, which is exciting. No spoilers. See you next time, and have a nice day.
See you soon.